Let's start with API testing. So what is an API? API stands for Application Programming Interface. It is something which helps two independent software to communicate with each other. When APIs communicate over internet, we call it web service. So to understand this, let's take a simple example. Okay, you all must have gone to some restaurant, right? So when you go to a restaurant for eating food, what we do, we go into the restaurant, sit, and then somebody comes in, a waiter comes in and asks for what do you want to eat. And then you give your order, right? Now, that waiter is not going to cook that food and give it to us. That waiter is more like a messenger. It will take our order, will go to the kitchen and give this order to the chef. Now, chef will prepare that food for us, and that waiter will bring that food back to us. So what is this waiter? Waiter is like a messenger, right? It is taking the message from us, giving to the kitchen doing or preparing the food, and then giving that food back to us, right? So that is what API is. So API is like a messenger. It translates our message from, like, there is a client, there is a server, right? So when we are initiating any request, we become the client, and the system which serves that request becomes the server. Okay. So when I request for something, a messenger, this API will take my message, will go to the server will do the computing and will send the request back. Right. So that is what an API is. Let's take another example. So let's say you all must have used some kind of aggregator websites like makemytrip.com or yatra.com or any other aggregator website. You must have worked on it, right? So let's take an example of Make My Trip. What you do when you have to book a flight. You go to makemytrip.com. There is a flight form. You fill the form, submit, and then Make My Trip takes some time and gives you the best result, right? So let's say you want to book a flight from India to Frankfurt. So what you'll do, you'll open a form, tell that I'm traveling from India to Frankfurt on this date and submit. So what happens when you submit? Okay. See, these airlines are not owned by Make My Trip. Like Make My Trip does not own Vistara or Air India or any other airline. What it do, it requests their portal. Okay, so Make My Trip, like when you initiate a request, you fill that form, Make My Trip triggers a request. That request is sent to Vistara and has some information that a user is requesting a flight from New Delhi to Frankfurt from this date to this date. This is the start date and this is the return date. Okay. Vistara will check based on these requests what options are available and sends a response back. Okay. Again, in some response format. And then Make My Trip is not only sending these requests to only Vistara, it is sending to SpiceJet, it is sending to Gulf Air, and many other. And to protect the identity, all this communication is secured using authentication keys or access token. So we'll talk more about authentication key and access token later. Okay. And then once it has received the response from various airlines, then what Make My Trip do is, whatever response it has received from all the airlines, it processes it at its own end and gives you the best result possible. Right? So this is an example of how APIs are used in real world. Now, why API testing? Okay. See, we saw this example, but in real world, each and every application of yours is also usually has some kind of APIs. Okay. So let's say you're building any simple API, any simple application. So usually an application consists of three parts: a data layer, which stores the data, a backend layer or the logic layer, which has the APIs basically, where the logic is written, and a front end or UI layer. Okay, so when you open any application in the world, what we open? We usually open the UI, right? So UI has some static data and then there are some dynamic data. That dynamic data is actually comes from this logic layer. So logic layer, what it do is basically, let's say you are filling a form. So when you fill a form from UI layer, that when you submit, that data goes to the logic layer. Okay, and logic layer sends the, like, do the logic, apply the logic, sends the request to data if it needs some data, get the data back, apply again logic, and then send the data back to the UI layer. Right. So logic layer is more like a, or this application is more like a something where logic is applied, where code is written, right? Now in real world, usually this layer is developed for the UI layer. I'm not saying for all the projects, but most of the times you will notice that the application layer is built before UI is even built, right? So if you are waiting for UI to be developed and then testing your application, then you are actually late in the process, right? So what we do is we expose this logic layer. Okay, we expose this logic layer. We expose these APIs, and then we do API testing. Parallelly, your UI is being developed. So by the time your UI is developed, your APIs are already tested. And if there is any issues, anything which you need to fix, you can fix it here. Okay, and using APIs, what you're testing the application logic, the main reason why you are developing. After that, the only thing which will be left is whatever data is coming from these APIs, whether that is getting integrated with the UI layer properly or not. So in a way, you have reduced the effort required in testing when you directly do API testing. So one reason that UI is usually developed later than API, and before UI is developed, you are verifying your APIs are correct. Okay. And then the only thing pending will be the integration. So you can quickly check the integration, whether integration is proper, and that assures that your UI is developed well. Okay. Another reason is that when we do testing through UI, sometimes that can be faulty because of UI issues, especially when you're doing UI testing, automation testing. That is why we focus more and more on API tests. Okay. If your API testing is strong, very strong, then you can rely on your logic more. And then you know that, okay, if any issue is coming on UI, that is mainly because of integration. So this is the reason we do API testing first. Okay. Also, I want to talk about a testing triangle here. Okay. What does it says is that in the hierarchy, okay, what has more impact? What type of testing has more impact? Okay. So if you go with this testing triangle, it says that we should do the maximum unit testing, right? Because unit testing is like done usually while developing, so it has the best impact. But since here we are not talking about unit testing, we are mainly talking about API testing. So in between API testing and UI testing, we should focus more and more on API testing. Even if you're doing the integration testing, you should do it through APIs, because higher you go in this order, like it takes more time to develop the UI test compared to API test. And they are also very expensive to develop because you'll need a lot of expertise to do the UI testing, and the code, like the scenario coverage is also less comparatively in UI testing than in API testing. Also, the more focus you keep on unit test than on API tests, testing efforts are less and cost is high in like unit test or in integration test than in unit test, right? So we should focus maximum on unit test, then on API test, and then on UI test. And that is the reason like we are focusing more and more on API testing. Okay. Now APIs are of various types. We have SOAP APIs, we have REST APIs, we have GraphQL, and so on. And all these APIs work on one protocol called HTTP protocol. Okay, now here for reference, we are only taking REST API. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Okay, so REST RE stands for representational, S stands for state, and T stands for transfer. Okay, what does it mean? So it's more of an architectural style where you can define how your like web service or an API should look. Okay, and also in like why we are calling it representation, because the resources can be represented in different format, like in form of text or JSON or XML, which we will see in some time. Okay. Then there are 7 principles in REST APIs. I'm not going into that, like the theory of that, but we will see some of them like while doing the practical examples. Okay, in very simple terms, for a REST API to work, you need a client and you need a server. Okay, so the one which initiates the request is the client. The one which serves the request is a server. So always REST requests are between a client and a server, right? So let's talk about CRUD operation. So this is my server. This is my server, and let's say this is my client. So client is, let's say, my book, make my trip application. Okay, and I want to book a flight from New Delhi to Mumbai on 10th of August. And I send all this, put all these details. Okay. And then when so this is a client, this is a server. Now, there's something called CRUD operation. CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. Okay. When through client, you're sending a request to create something on a server. Like you want to create a booking, so that is create. You want to create a user, that is create. You want to create any other resource, so that is create. Read is read, or you can also call it retrieve, is fetching some information. Like I want to know how many users are there, or I want to know how many different flights for this particular data are there. So that is read or retrieve. Update is when there is an existing resource on the server and you want to update it, maybe update some of its value. And D stands for delete. Delete is where you want to delete a particular resource on the server. Like you want to delete a user or you want to delete a booking. So that is, these are 4 CRUD operations. So we have like for creating, we use a method called post. Okay, so in HTTP, like when you send an HTTP request, we need to define what type of HTTP request it is. Okay, and that is defined through methods. So post is a method. Okay, post method is used for create. Get method is used for read or retrieve. Put method is used for create and update. Similarly, patch method is used for update. And delete method is used for delete. So there is a minor difference between put and patch. We will see in some time, but in simple terms, if I say put is like updating the whole resource, and patch is like patching the resource. Like there is some part of it which you are fixing. Okay, so we'll see this difference between put and patch in few minutes in detail. Now let's talk about how a get operation is done. Okay, so let's say again, there is a client, there is a server. So client sends a request. What that request will have? Okay, so the request will have an HTTP method, since we are like performing a get operation to get some information from the resource. So the method will be get. Okay, along with this request, we also send something called headers. Okay, and in get request, we can also pass some query parameters. We'll talk about it in a minute. So when through this client, you send a request to the server will check, okay, what we are requesting, and accordingly send a response. The response, like the request is sent on a particular URL, and response usually has these things: a status code, a response header, and a response payload. Okay, what is status? Status code means what happened to your request, whether it was successful or failed or what. Okay. So status code can be 200. Okay. It can be 201 created. It can be 300 series response. It can be 400. It can be 500. Okay. So we'll talk more about the status code. But when a request is successful, we send a status code of 200 only. Okay. So that is what status code is. Response header means that like some extra information about your response. Okay, so we'll see these headers in few minutes. And a response payload is the actual data. Whatever you requested, you get the response, right? So the response will be in a we call this as a response payload, and it can be in an XML format, it can be in an HTML format, it can be in a like a text format, and so on. Okay, and to give all this data, server queries what? Your database. Okay, so in very simple term, if I repeat this, when I have to perform a get operation, I need a client. That client will create a request. That request will have an HTTP method, which will be get, will have some headers. Headers are like some extra information or metadata. And then it can have query parameter to query the data. Okay, then it initiates the request. Request goes to the server. Server then checks what is the request and query the database for any data, and then sends the response back. That response usually has three things: status code, response headers, and response payload. Status code tells what happened to your request, whether it was served properly, or whether it was redirected, or whether it was there was an error in the request, or your server was not able to respond back. Okay. So as you can see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, which talks about this get operation. Okay. So yeah, you send the request and you get the response, and response usually has the status code, response headers, and response payload. Okay. Response payload will be a response like this from Bangalore to Delhi and so on. Okay. So let's see this with an example. So what I'll do is now to demo this, I have a sample application which I'll start in a minute. Okay, it is started. So I've deployed a sample application on my local environment, and let me bring that here. Okay. So localhost colon 3000 is the port on which my application is running. It's a very simple conduit application, which is like a blogging website. Okay. So let me log out of this application. Okay. So this is an application. Now, see, localhost 3000. First thing, usually when you do API testing, your team will provide you the documentation of your APIs. Okay. So we know what APIs to test, where, what type of data to send. So usually your team will give you the data. Okay. But I'm also like teaching you here, or just guiding you here, that what if you don't have the documentation? How will you verify if your APIs are working fine or not? Okay, so I open my application through a URL. So here in that case, it is localhost colon 3000. Localhost means it is locally hosted, and 3000 is the port on which this application is running. So right click and inspect. This is called Chrome DevTools, and in Chrome DevTools, there is something called Network tab. Okay. Now in the Network tab, it can track all the requests going and response coming. Okay. And you can apply filter. Like if you want to get all the requests, you can click on all. If you just say fetch XHR, then it will only record your HTTP requests. So let's say here I select this, and then notice what I'm doing. I'm just like sending a request. Okay. So what it did, by default, the code is developed in a way that when you hit this localhost colon 3000 request, it automatically triggers some requests, some APIs. Okay. See, you can see some data on the screen, right? You can see these articles are coming, some default articles are coming. You can see this tags are coming here. So from where these are coming? These are coming from database, right? But like how from database? These are some APIs which are publicly exposed. And as soon as you send this localhost, like you send this request on localhost colon 3000, these are the requests which are actually triggered. Okay, so one by one we'll see. First, we'll see the simplest one, which is tags. So when I click on tags, you click on headers. Okay, you will notice that there is something called request URL. Okay, so request URL is that it is sending the request on this URL, which is localhost colon 3000 API slash tags. So what is the slash API slash tags? This is the path or that URI where my tags API is hosted or hosted. Okay. Also, in the preview, you can see what is the response it is giving. So it is giving me these response that there are tags like test, T, EST, test, Cypress, Selenium, One, Automation, Meetup, SOAP UI, and so on. So this is the response which I got. Okay, in the preview, proper response format in a JSON you can get here. Okay, sorry. I think I selected something else. Yeah. Okay. So in the tags, when you go to the response, these are the responses you're getting. Right. So this was first like API, which was trigger automatic. What if I want to trigger this API through my tool? Okay. So here I have my Postman. I'm opening this Postman. Okay. Now in the Postman, there is a concept of workspaces, and then there is a concept of collections. So workspaces means that you're creating your multiple workspaces. Maybe let's say you're working for two different projects within your organization. So you can keep two different workspaces here. Okay. So let's say I right now is in my workspace and then I have this collection. So I've like from here, you can click on new and create a new collection. Collection is like collection of multiple APIs. Okay. Now in collection, let's say I create a new request. So I'll just say right click, add request. Okay. And let me close all of the tabs. Okay. So this is a new request I'm creating. You can change this name. Say, for example, I want to call it get tags. So give it a name. Then what are we doing? We are sending get request, right? So from the dropdown, you can select whether it's a get, post, put, batch, delete. These are the 5 mainly used. There are many methods. Okay, head options. Many other methods are there, but we're not going to use any of them. We'll be focusing only on these 5. So let's say I want to send a get request. Where do I want to send? On localhost, right? Colon 3000. So I'll add it like this, localhost colon 3000. Okay. Now, since it's a get request, I don't have to pass anything. Like I don't want to pass any parameters. I don't want to pass any, like it's a public API. So I don't want to pass authorization. There are some default headers which it sends. We'll talk more about headers in few minutes. I don't have to send any body because it's a get request. Okay. But my request is not going on localhost 3000. Where it is going on /API/tags. Remember that URL /API/tags. So /API/tags. And with this, if I send a request, you will notice I get the same response as I was getting here in the response. Right? Here, you will also see what is the status code coming. So I'm getting a 200 OK status code. That means everything is okay. Sometimes we also verify that, okay, how much time this API is taking. So this tells you that, okay, this request took 51 milliseconds. What is the size? So the size is 399 bytes. Okay. This response I'm getting in JSON format. That's why it is immediately showing me in JSON. You can change that into other formats also. but you can only modify if it supports. Right now, it does not support. That's why you see it's still a JSON. So let's keep it JSON format. Okay. So this is how you get the response. And also we talked about response headers. So you can see the response headers here. These are the headers which are sent by your server to us. This was a very simple GET request, right? If we see another example, we have this articles API. So if I go to headers, you can see headers request is going here. Okay. So localhost colon 3000 API articles. Let me copy this, add another GET request. Let's say I call it GET articles. Let me add it here instead. So let's change here. So let's say I call it GET articles. Okay. Again, I'll send this GET request on this port localhost colon 3000 API articles. Okay. And you'll also notice here that it also has two more things, limit 10 and offset 10. So what are these? These are called query parameters. Okay. What is query parameters? Let me show you. So in the parameters, we can add query parameters. What are the parameters? One is limit and second is offset. So limit. Okay. So limit, let's say I'm putting 5. So what is this? This is like a filter. Okay. So limit is defined in your code that, okay, if you add limit, whatever limit you add, that many number of articles it will show me. So you're limiting the number of articles. Okay. And offset means that from where you are starting, from 0 or from 1 or from 2. Okay. So these are called query parameters. I can also pass offset. And let's say 0. So if you notice, as soon as I'm adding the values here, it's adding it through using the question mark, limit equal to 5 and offset equal to 0. Okay. So this is called query parameter. You are adding some filters to your GET request, right? Then when you send the request, you'll notice I got the response. And if you count the count of the response, you'll notice that you get 5 requests. Right? So you're getting 5 data here, right? So this is another example of like sending a GET request with query parameter, right? Now, let's see more examples. So let's say I want to, okay, let me do one thing. Right click, inspect, go to network again. And let's say I want to know more about this particular robot framework. Okay. I click on this. Yes, is there any question? Okay, so everyone, please keep yourself on mute. Sanjoli, you have a question. What is authorization and what is token? I'm coming to that. Like in a few minutes, I'm coming to that. That's a complete topic I'll be covering in detail. Okay, so here what I did, I'm querying this article, which is robot framework. So if you see here, a request is sent. Okay, again, it's a GET request. And this time the URL we are sending is like, we are referring to a particular item, right? So let's say I call it, okay, let me add it here. So let's say I add a new request and let's say I call it GET article, right? And what we are doing is I'm querying a particular article here. So this is not a query parameter. Rather, this is you're getting an giving an absolute address of a request which you want to query. That means out of all the requests, I want to query the one which has an ID this. So this is a unique ID. This is also known as URL slug, right? Okay. So This is how you send GET request. Now let's look at another type of request. Let's say I want to sign up here. So let's say click on sign up. Okay. Now again, I'll put inspect and go to network. Since we don't have documentation, we are relying on this. So let's say I add a request like this. Let's say Rahul. Okay. So this is my name, email, and password. Okay. And notice I'll click on sign up. So what it did was, okay, it has sent this request. Okay, this is GET request. So it sent this user's request. It sent a request to users. Notice it's a post request, right? And here you're getting status code as 200 because this is not developed with the best of the possible APIs. Okay. Now in real projects, you can also, in real projects, instead of 200, okay, you will get 201 request. Okay. Now go to payload. So I'll go to payload. And here you can see this is the data with which I can send the request. Okay. So when I select this is my request payload. Request payload means this is the information we are sending along with the post request. Okay. So if I go back here, like this is a get operation. So for create operation, like we open this here. So for create operation, you have a client, you have a server. So client sends a request. When client sends the request, it sends a HTTP method, which is post. Okay, then it has headers, and then it has payload. Payload is the request payload. Okay, so using the request payload, you send the request. That means you're telling that, okay, this type of data is what I want to create. That you send with the request. Server serves that request and sends you the response back. Response, you can get, like, if it is successful, you'll get 201 created. And you can also get, let's say, account ID 001 is created. So again, you'll get a status code, you get a response header, and you get payload. Okay. Now, Rushikesh, you're saying these are dummy and practice APIs like so authorization mechanism. Yeah. So, okay. Then in this application, there are two parts. There are like public APIs, and then there are authenticated APIs are also there. So I'm going to show you both. Right now, I'm just like going step by step. Okay. So right now, I'm just showing you the public APIs, but then we'll also talk about authorization and authentication in detail, and then we'll introduce that. Okay. So now let's say I want to do the same API or want to send the same API through Postman. So here I'll add a new request. Let's say add request. And let's say I call it add user. So I want to add a user. So first thing, this is a post request. So change this to post. Add your URL. So my URL is this localhost colon 3000 API/user. So I'll am I audible? Okay, am I audible now? Hello?
Yes,
Yeah.
Saurabh.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yes,
there was sorry, there was a drop. Okay, so I've connected again. So localhost colon 3000 API user. So this is the request where I'm sending the post request, right? Now in post request, we don't pass query parameters because query is like adding filters. Filters usually you add when you're getting something, right? Then we have here we need to add payload, right? So that is added through body. So go to body. In body, there are different type of payloads you can add. We'll talk more about this form data and exam, like form URL encoding sometime later. Right now, I'm just showing you the basic one. So let's select raw. Okay, so I'm sending raw type of data, but I need to send it in JSON format. So select JSON from here. And then go back here, go to your payload. Okay, right click, copy object. Don't copy value, copy object. So copy object, paste, right? Let's change this. So let's say I change it to some Auth, and let's say auth@abc.com, and this is the password. Can everyone go on mute, please? Okay. So this is my test data, like my payload, right? So I'm sending a post request at this URL with this data, right? Which is in JSON format. When I send this request, you can see it has created this user, okay, and like status 200, okay, because this is not the best API. In real projects, you will get 201 created, okay, and the user is created with this name Gautam, email is this, and like again, it's not the best possible this, so it gives you the token like this. Okay, so it is giving you the token, like directly the token. We'll talk about the token in a few minutes. Okay, so I got a user. That means this user is now created, right? So through my API, I have created a user. Can I use this to log in? Let's see. So this is my email. I'll copy this email. Okay. So let me log out of this, Rahul. Okay, so I'll sign in. Now to sign in, let me close this. Okay, so to sign in, I'll paste this and I'll pass the password. Okay, so right click, inspect. Okay, I'll go to the network. We'll send this sign in request. So this is this is a user which I've added through my Postman, not from the UI. So let's see if it is created. So I'll click on sign in, right? And you will notice that, okay, there is a login request which goes, and in login request, this is the data I'm sending. And with this data, if you go to the response, you'll see that, okay, a user is created and it also is sending me a token. Okay. Now, any request now after login, if you have to do, say, for example, you want to add a new article or you want to do any changes in the settings, you can only do that using the token. So now all my other requests are authorized requests. So what is authorization and authentication? Let's quickly understand that. Okay. Then I'll come back to this particular thing. So let me go to authentication and authorization. Yeah. Okay, so let's understand authentication and authorization. So imagine it like this. There are two terms, authentication and authorization. Authentication is who you are. What is your identity? Let's take an example. Say, instead of having this call here, maybe I'm coming to your office for delivering this training. So I am not an employee of your organization, right? So how would I get access to your training rooms? So when I reach to your office, the front desk, first I need to prove who I am. Okay. That is called authentication. So I can show my passport, or maybe I can show my Aadhaar card, or I can show my, say, any social security number. That proves my identity, who I am. So that is authentication. Like you pass username and password, that tells you that, okay, you are a valid user. That is authentication. Showing my Aadhaar card or my social security number proves that I'm Saurabh. But does that prove or does that allow me to access your office? No. Then what will happen? The person at the receptionist will check other documents, like they can ask for, say, an email, show me an email or an invitation letter, which proves that, okay, you are here for a training, right? And once I prove that, once I show the documents, then they give me an access card. And that access card provides me authorization to use some of the resources. So that gives me an authorization to, say, use your training room. So I get authorized that, okay, using this access card, you can access all the training rooms. You can go to XYZ room. So that is what authorization is. Authentication and authorization. Authentication proves who you are, and authorization proves what all you can access. Now, there are many authorization and authentication schemes available. We have basic, bearer, digest, or auth. 90% of the places, either you'll find JWT token or you will find OAuth. These are two well-used authentication schemes. Okay, I'll cover this OAuth probably in some time, but you got an idea what is an authentic, like what is authentication and what is authorization, right? So in this application, we have implemented a very basic authentication scheme. What it is that when you log in, you get an access token. You can use this access token to authorize your request. If you send any request without access token, it will block it. Say for example, in this application, if let's say there is a new article tab, like I can add a new article. So let's pause this. Let's clear everything here. Okay, and let me first fill the data. So let's say I want to add an article on API testing. What is this article about? API testing using Postman. Okay, tips and tricks for API testing. Okay. And then I add the tag, let's say test. Okay, and let's say I add one more tag, which is Postman. Right. And then I want to publish this article. Okay, notice here. When I click on publish article, okay, this is the article which is published. Okay, so let's go to headers. Now you will notice something. Let me expand it. Yeah. Okay, so you can see. So I'm going in the headers, go to journal. See, my request is sent on this URL. So let's say I copy this URL here, and let's say I want to add an article. Yeah, add article. It's a post request, so I'll select post. And let's say this is the URL I've copied. Okay, I'm sending a post request. Okay. Then look at the payload. So this is the payload. So I right click, copy object, and go to body, go to raw, select JSON, and pass this JSON. Okay. Then if I send with this, let's see what happens. See, it gives me an error, unauthorized token was not found. That means now my API is this is unauthorized. I cannot use it. Right? That's where you can pass authorization. Okay, so under headers, you can see there is a header going called authorization, which has a value token and that value, which you were getting when you logged. Right? So when I add user, I got this token, right? So let's use this token to pass it in add articles. Okay, so in here, either you can pass under authorization, okay, or in headers, you can add this token called authorization. Yeah, just make sure it is with Z, yes. And then here, token, space, and that value. Okay, so this is how you will pass the values. Now, when I send this request, okay, I think that token is expired. Let me log in. Maybe.
Authorization spelling is incorrect.
Spelling mistake.
Oh, okay, yeah. That's what I'm thinking, that I'm not, I mean, there is no expiry in this token. So how can, yeah, authorization. And then when I send the request, you can see that API is working and you get the, like the whole response. Right? So this is how you can like use the authorization. So you can either add it like this authorization, or under like there is another tab called authorization, in which there are many methods like no JWT, beer, basic auth, OAuth 2.0. So these are some of the authentication schemes. You need to understand the flow of each authorization, and then only you can use. Like if I have to use JWT token, then I need a secret and a like few more details, then only it will generate a token for me. Similarly, if you pass OAuth 2.0, so instead of JWT, if you use OAuth 2.0, then you need many other details to pass here. Okay, so that's why like I'm not passing anything, and we are using simply this header here. Where is the header? Yeah, under headers, we are passing this authorization. The value is coming as token and this value, right? And when you send this request, you get the response because this request becomes authorized request. Okay. Now, let's say I want to update this article. I want to edit this article. So to edit article, I'll click on this edit article, right? And then let's say I want to update it with, instead of Postman, I want to say Postman 2. Okay. And let's say inspect. Okay. And I'll click on update. So in the network tab, you can see this request is sent, which is a put request. Okay. Now the difference between put and patch is, in case of put, even if you're changing one value, you still have to pass the whole request payload. But if you're like using patch, then you only need to update that particular value which is updating. So it's like patching the request, and it's like put is like it deletes and recreates the whole thing. Okay, not delete and recreate, but yeah, it like uses the whole payload. Okay, so let's say here I add a request and post put. So in the headers, this is the article. Okay, and let's say the article which I added here, I use that same slug. This is what I want to update. Okay, and earlier I used, sorry, in the body I use this JSON data, right? So copy this. Okay, and input body raw JSON. I will pass this, and let's say I want to update that this value is becoming 2. Okay, and send that data. Okay, I need to add that header, authorization header. So let me copy the value from headers, copy this value. Okay, and in the headers, I can add authorization. This value. Okay, and then when I send, it updates the value. Right? So this is put request. Now let's say if I want to delete this, so what will happen? I'll go and just click on this delete article. It asks for confirmation and delete. Right? So same thing we can do to delete. Again, I'll not here. Let's say I add an request here. Add request, and let's say I call it delete article. Okay, and from here we'll select delete. Let me pass this. This is what I want to delete, and we only want to pass the authorization header. So let me copy the value again, and go to headers, add authorization header, and pass this value and send. And it is deleted. Okay, now you must have noticed that I'm like manually copying the authorization. So is there a way that I can automate the whole flow? So yes, there is a flow, but for that we need to understand something called JSON path. Okay, so let's look into what is JSON path and how to get JSON path. Okay, first of all, you should know what is JSON. Okay, So JSON is a data structure. It's a form of presenting any data. Okay, let's say you have any data in the world. Let's say I have some data like name equal to Saurabh, email equal to, let's say, Saurabh at aptitude.com. And then I have, let's say, phone number. And let's say the phone number, I have multiple phones. So let's say I just give some number, comma, some number. Then address. So let's say I have two addresses. Okay, one is my, let's say, home address, which is something over something. Okay, and then I have my office address, so which is let's say something over something, right? Okay, and in this, so this is my data. Now I want to present this in a JSON format. Okay, so how will you do it? So for this, you can actually use some kind of Visual Studio Code or any text editor, maybe Notepad++ or something. Since I'm using Mac, I don't have a Notepad++, so I'll just use this. Let's say I create a new file, JSON file. Let's say I'm putting it in downloads, test.json. Okay, so I'm just creating this JSON file. Okay, so every JSON file starts with a curly brace and ends with a curly brace. This means it's an object, right? Now I pass here name. What is the name? Saurabh. I will pass Saurabh. Every two values in JSON are separated by comma. So name, at the end you say pass, comma. Then yeah. So next is, let's say, email. So bypass email, and the value of the email is, let's say, Saurabh at aptitude.com. Okay. And then again a comma, right? Then I have phone number. So phone number, okay, let's say I have, like I showed you that I have multiple phone numbers, right? So that will become a list of phone numbers. So let's say this, comma, this, comma, this, like this. Then I have address. So address is, again, with phone number, after phone number, you need to put a comma. Okay, now address is what? As I said, I have two addresses, right? So either you can create them as a list of two address, or I can just say that, okay, I have two address. One is my home address. So it's an object I'm saying, home, which is something of oblique something, right? Comma. Let's say other address I'm saying is office, which is like this, right? So this becomes my JSON, right? So you need to understand what data you have, and based on that, you need to prepare the data, right? Now, to get any value from this JSON, how will you do that? See, let's say this is my JSON, and I want to get different values from this JSON. So your first name, last name, age, address, like this, right? So here, dollar represent the whole data. But if I need first name, I say dollar dot first name. See, you here, you got the first name. Similarly, if I need last name, you pass the last name, you get the last name. Similarly, you pass city, you get the city. City, okay, city is inside address. So first you need to get the address. So get address. Then address is a object, further object. Then you can again say dot city. You get this Nara, right? You want phone numbers. So phone numbers. See, phone numbers is a list of objects. So you got both. Now, let's say I want the second phone number. So you pass 1. Why 1? Because index starts from 0. So in square bracket, you pass 1. This is my first, like the second number. And in that also you need just number. So you just say dot number. Okay. So like this, there is this whole thing which you can explore. So there is a JSON path like tutorial. So you can use this to get various values, right? But I just give you a brief idea how to use the JSON path. Now let's go back to our Postman. And in our Postman, we had this like various requests, and I want to connect these requests, right? Like this, I had this put request where I'm editing, say, let's say edit article, right? And similarly, I have this add article. So after adding article, I want to also verify my edit article is working. So what I can do is from the response, I can get this value, which value, the slug, and I can pass that slug into a different request. Like here, I want to pass that. Okay. So how can you do that? This is the value I want to get and I want to pass. So go to test results. Okay, no. 1 second. They have changed some UI. I think no. Yeah. So yeah, get a variable. Okay. So in that test, let's say I get a variable here. Okay. Let's say my response is here. So I just say, how can you get the slug? Okay, if I copy the whole response and I go to this and let's say I paste here. Okay, so if I say simply $.article dot slug, then you get the slug. This is what I need, right? So I go here and now whenever you use it in code, you don't have to put dollar. So here, let's say I say article dot slug. Okay, and let's say I put this into a variable called slug equal to this. And then here, when I'm passing the body, or here, I can use dollar slug. Let's see if it not found. Okay, I think doing something wrong here. So there was something called post request. Okay, just give me 1 second. I'll Google it. Sorry, this UI has changed, so in a time I'll not use this Postman. Yeah, I'm doing the same thing. Okay. So yeah, we have to use this set an environment variable. Yeah, so set an environment variable and set the variable which is slug. Okay, and variable value is article.slug. Okay, so they've merged everything into test. Earlier there used to be a post test. So let me send this request and now, okay, I deleted this. Okay. It was not saved. So let me do it again. Put slug, and in the body, after the post request, body copy, in the body select raw, change it to JSON, and let's say I paste it here. Okay, and let's say I'm updating it with some value. Okay, so now when you run from here, right click, run collection. Okay, so run conduit app. Okay, which one is empty now? Get art. Okay, I have not saved all these files. Okay, now let's run. Right click. What happened? Git tags. Okay, so close all tabs. Right now, right click, run collection. I want to color run all this. So you can see now, this exists, run, executed, post, put, noticed, found. Okay, I think I got it. What is the issue? So in my post, uh, like in the test, I forget here you need to first get the JSON data. So get the JSON data, which is equals to JSON dot parse, and pass the response body. I think here there must be a snippet for that. It's response body. Okay, and this article dot slug will be like this. Response body dot article dot slug. Let's run it again. Article. Something I'm doing wrong. Send an advance and clear. This is the format. DM dot response dot JSON. Okay, and it will be JSON data dot article. Right click, run connection. Yeah, now it is working. So you can, okay, this is working. Fail. Article. pm.response.json. Not required. Start again. Still not picking the. I think I'm missing something here. We'll check and update it. But yeah, using this tests here, we can actually get, like, you can add the test in each request, like in tags. Once you have added all the, like, you have added, you're doing a get request and you know what all responses you're expecting, like status code should be 200. All those tests also you can add, right? I'm not sure why this is not working. It should have worked. I'm using this log. Okay, I think the reason the reason could be that I'm using, this was the reason. I was using the whole, this in a different format. Yeah, now it is work. It should work. Okay, it's missing the authorization header, but the main reason is working. So headers, edit article, authorization, and when you send the request, it updates. So what was the problem? The problem was I was using the environment variable in a wrong way. Instead of dollar curly brace, it should be double curly braces. This is how you should use. Now, if I run it all in together, right click, run collection. Okay, it was not saved. That's sad. Run again. Yeah, now everything, see, this is also giving 200. Okay, right? So this is how you can, so this concept is known as correlation, where you're passing the value of one request and passing it to another request, right? Let me close all tabs. Close tabs. Okay, so like one thing could be that once you have added a new user, with this new user, I want you to log in. Once you log in, then you get an access token. Use that access token in rest of your request. Like while adding an article, instead of you taking this authorization token hard coded, you get it through token. Okay, so that can also be done again same way. Okay, so this is called correlation. Now, one last thing before we end the session is about the headers. So, okay, one more thing. There is something called status code. We discussed 200 series status code, like 200 is okay, 201 is created, right? Then similarly, there is 300 series. 300 series is that when you request some resource and that resource redirects you to something else. So that is redirection, like 302 redirect. Okay. And then two most important things are 400 series and 500 series. So 400 is that when you when you make a mistake, like we saw that when we are requesting something which does not exist, say for example, if I try to get tags 1 instead of tags, you get 404 not found. That means you're trying to access something which does not exist, right? So what is this? This is our mistake, right? Similarly, when you, let's say, add an article, and in your body you're passing some key which is not there, like you pass name equal to 1 2. So again, um there is a problem with the JSON. I'm not having a comma also. So when you send this request, see, you're getting 40 bad request. That means you're sending a wrong request here, right? If I pass like this, okay, so it is written in a way that it accepts even if you pass something extra. So let's ignore it. But when I was putting a wrong JSON, it was giving me this error, right? Similarly, let's say here in the authorization, if in the headers authorization, if let's say I remove this token word, or maybe I just make this token without space, right? And send, then you get 401 unauthorized because your token is wrong. So what we are doing whenever a client is making a mistake, that is 400 series response. Okay, so client is making an error. And how do you verify it? Look at the error message, and based on that, you will be able to decide whether it's a bad request. So that means you have wrong JSON data. If it's 401 unauthorized, that means your credentials are wrong. Like this, you'll verify. Okay, and what is 500 series? 500 series responses when your server is making an error. Okay, so your server is making some mistake. So server is throwing an exception saying whatever you are requesting is wrong. So that is 500 series, like 502 bad gateway and so on. Okay. And then we have something called headers. Headers are like some extra key value pair which goes with the request, which gives more information about the request and the response, right? Now, 2 types of headers are used a lot. Like all these are different headers which are available: authorization, content ID, content length, content type, data, connection, accept, location, range. I think all are pretty clear with the name, except this accept and there is something called content type. What is the difference between two? Okay, so there are two: accept and content type. So both headers have the same value, which tells what type of data is there, whether it's a JSON type or whether it's an XML type and so on, a file type or something. Okay, now the difference between the two is accept is sent through client, okay, which tells the server that what type of request I'm sending. Okay, so accept and content type are both header types sent through the client, that is through browser. Accept header is a way to tell the client to specify the media type it is expecting. Okay, so it's like this. When you're sending the content type, it tells, okay, this request is in JSON format or as an XML format. And accept is where I'm telling the server that I can accept JSON, XML, and so on. In very simple terms, let's say I'm the client, you are server, right? We are communicating right now. So right now I'm speaking in English, right? That is my content type. The content type is English, that I'm speaking in English. But if let's say I also send an header which says accept, I can speak English, Hindi, and Punjabi. So these are 3 languages I can speak, but right now I'm speaking only with English. So content type is what type of data you are sending, and accept is what type of data you can understand. Okay, so server can respond you accordingly. Okay. So that is about accept and content type. And authentication we have understood, right? So there is Auth 2.0 flow, okay, which like in real world you should be aware of. Okay, so whenever you deal with a Auth 2.0 application, usually the flow is something like this. Okay, we have something called resource owner, authorization server, and resource server. Okay, and let's say there is a client. So let's try understanding it with the same example which I gave you earlier for authorization and authentication. Like you are going to, like I'm coming to your office for a training. So first thing what I'll do, I'll raise an authorization request. While raising this authorization request, I'll prove my identity by showing the passport and something, right? After that, they'll ask me, show me something which proves that, okay, you are here for training. So I'll show my email or invitation letter. So that is your first request. Okay. In the authorization request, we show, we show that, okay, we are authorized to use these services. And along with that, we also define something called scope. Okay. Then this resource owner will provide you an authorization grant. Okay, authorization grant is like telling, okay, this person, I grant this user to use this. Okay. So it's like I went to the front desk and at the front desk, I showed that letter. Front desk gave me a written message saying, go to the room where, like next room where they can give you the access card. So I go to that room, the second room, show that slip which says that I can get an access card. So that is what authorization grant looks like. I'll use that authorization grant to go to the authorization server, and that authorization server give me an access token. And that access token, all my scope is also defined. And then you can use this access token to request the server, and like I can go and log into your training room. So that is my server. Okay. So this is a flow which is used for OAuth 2.0. I don't have an example right now, but in one of the other session, we can actually see a live application with this flow. Okay. There are many such applications available. You can use Spotify. Spotify uses OAuth 2.0. Google uses OAuth 2.0. So you can use these applications to verify their flow. Okay. So this is an example of OAuth 2.0. Like there is many authorization and authentication schemes like JWT token. You can read about that. Yeah. And that's all for today. It was a brief session where I wanted you to introduce to API testing. We can get into deep probably in some other sessions. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'll stop sharing for now. Okay, there are some questions in chat. Can you do patch? See, patch can only be done when your application accepts it. Okay, right now this application which I was showing you does not accept patch. So patch can only be used when your application can accept. Usually an application only allows put because patch sometimes has some security vulnerabilities also. Okay, so patch is avoided. That's why we usually use put.